Hi, I'm Paige. Welcome back to my kitchen. You're watching the next episode of Doughing It with Paigey. Tomorrow we are making baguettes with Poolish, which means tonight we need to go ahead and prepare our pre-ferment. Now the pre-ferment is exactly the same as it was last week. The only thing is the measurements are a little bit different, but the Poolish will still be equal parts flour and water. Now speaking of water, I know we touched base on this last week, but the recipe doesn't actually say what temperature to have your water at while you're making the Poolish. I always like to stay on track and refer to the temperature calculations on page 21 in your book. These baguettes are going to be a little bit more advanced than the rustic baguettes that we made in the first chapter of this book. With all that being said, I'm really excited to try this recipe with you guys, so let's go ahead and start weighing out the ingredients for our Poolish. We're going to start off by weighing out our all-purpose flour, yeast, and water. We're then going to add our yeast directly on top of our water and whisk that up until it's nice and bubbly. Then we'll add our flour directly on top of this mixture. Now, last week I mixed this by hand and it was a very, very hydrated, wet mixture. So this week I'm using a rubber spatula and I'm just going to mix this up until it's really smooth. Once everything is well mixed, I'm going to go ahead and cover this up with a kitchen towel. Now, if your bowl has a set of lids and you want to cover it with a lid, go ahead and do that. Just make sure to very lightly place the lid on top of your bowl. The air bubbles from the Poolish will create a lot of pressure and you don't want your lid flying across the room. Last week we let this ferment for about 13 hours. I'm going to really push the limits on our Poolish this week and let this ferment for 16 hours this time. When we come back and check on our Poolish in the morning, it's going to be filled with air bubbles. Other than that, we're all finished up. I'm going to go ahead and enjoy the rest of my night. I'll see you guys in the morning. Hey, we're back. Our Poolish has been fermenting for about 16 hours. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like. As you can see, it's really bubbly. It smells very yeasty and fermented. So it's definitely ready for us to go ahead and start making our bread. So I'm doing things a little bit differently this week. I actually made our Poolish in a really, really large bowl. What I plan to do is add all of our other ingredients for our bread directly on top of the Poolish. That minimizes dishes that I have to wash later, and it just makes everything a little bit easier for me, so I'm gonna be doing it that way today. With all that being said, let's go ahead and start weighing out the ingredients for our bread. We're going to start off by weighing out our all-purpose flour, water, salt, and yeast. So I'm going to go ahead and add my yeast directly on top of my Poolish and then add my water into the same bowl. And I'm just going to jump right in and start kind of swishing this all around with my fingers and just try to get this all dispersed and bubbly. Now we're going to let this sit for just a couple minutes so that the yeast can activate. Now we're going to add our flour directly on top of this mixture and the salt on top of the flour. We're just going to jump right in and start mixing our dough by hand. Just make sure that you're squeezing it, scraping all of the dry ingredients off the sides of the bowl, and just really trying to get all of the dry ingredients well combined. Now I think a common theme among new bakers is not mixing your dough well enough. If you're mixing and you pull your dough up and it just breaks right off, that means that it needs a little bit more time mixing. So just continue to mix the dough well until you can get it really, really stretchy like this. We're gonna let this rest for about 40 minutes so that the flour can absorb some of that water. All right, it's been about 40 minutes. Our dough is done resting. We're gonna go ahead and start kneading it. Now, if you guys watched last week, you remember that this dough is very, very hydrated, so I'm adding a little bit more flour than usual to my countertops today. I'm gonna start off by turning my dough out of the bowl onto a floured countertop, and I'll just use my dough scraper to release the dough from the bowl. I'm also gonna add a little bit more flour to my dough. And you guys know the drill. When we start kneading, all we're gonna do is push the dough forward with the heel of our hand, pull the dough back, give it a quarter turn, forward, back, turn, forward, back, turn. We're gonna continue doing this for about 5 to 10 minutes until the dough has tightened up and it's not as slack. Now, I did cut the recipe in half today. If you watched last week, you know that I was dealing with an incredibly large amount of dough, very difficult to knead. I'm not looking to make as many baguettes as this recipe makes today, so I did cut it in half, and that is going to make kneading this dough way easier for me. So as you can see, I'm just continuing to just push the dough forward, pull it back, and just give it a quarter turn all in one motion. Now, I like to avoid adding too much flour when I knead. I feel like it really dries out my dough and it affects the final outcome of my bread. So if it's super sticky like this, if you're a new baker, just try not to get intimidated by this. I know that's really hard to do, especially when the dough is getting stuck to your hands like crazy. It's just kind of a weird and uncomfortable feeling, but as you continue to bake, you will kind of get over that. Now, my method for kneading, it may not be what every other baker does, but I like to knead it until I really just can't knead it anymore. It's just really flat, it's really stuck to my countertops, and then I will use my dough scraper to release this from the counter. Just kind of scoot it over a little bit. Reflour my countertops little by little. And just start all over again. You can probably tell our dough has started to tighten up. It's definitely not as slack as it was when we first started kneading it, so that means it is almost done being kneaded. I'm gonna knead this for another minute or so and we'll be done. Now that our dough is done being kneaded, I'm gonna go ahead and pop this back into the bowl. We're gonna let this rise for 2 hours and we'll come back and do a set of folds at the 1 hour mark. So I'll come back and check in with you guys then. Our dough's been rising for about an hour and here is what it looks like. We're gonna go around the dough and give it a set of folds, and all we're gonna do to do that is start from one side, stretch it and fold it to meet the other side. And we're gonna go all around the dough doing this. We're just gonna go around one time and then we'll continue to let this rise for another hour. We're gonna cover this back up with a floured kitchen towel and we'll come back and check this in another hour. All right, it's been about 2 hours. Our dough is done rising and here is what it looks like. So we're just gonna turn the dough out of the bowl. I'm gonna lightly flour my countertops, very lightly, and get this divided. I like to start off by getting it all into one sort of uniform rectangle shape and make cuts from there. We're gonna go ahead and divide our dough into probably 4 to 6 equal pieces. Now, I personally am terrible at getting these all the same size, especially when I'm trying to cut them into equal pieces. Just try to do the best you can. We'll see how this goes. As anticipated, my dough is all cut into different sizes, but we're gonna go ahead and let these rest for about 30 minutes on the countertop just like this, and we'll come back and get them shaped. Now before we get our dough shaped into baguettes, I want to briefly talk about shaping. Baguettes are a little bit more advanced. This is not something that we've covered in the previous recipes. Now I've tried this recipe about 3 times and I still haven't nailed the baguette shaping. I'm going to try the best I can today to demonstrate this for you guys. If this is your first time doing the recipe, just try not to be super hard on yourself. Just try to look at any mistakes that you might make as a learning experience for next time. All right, it's been about 30 minutes. Our dough is done resting. It's time to get these shaped into baguettes. So I'm gonna clear up my workspace really quickly. I'm just gonna kind of scoot these over a little bit and we'll get started. All right, I'm gonna add a little bit of flour to my countertops because our dough is gonna be a little bit sticky. I'm gonna take one of our pieces of dough here, turn it over so the sticky side is up facing us. We're going to start with some letter folds. We're going to take the far side from us, press this down to meet the middle, the side closest to us, and do the same thing. Use the heel of your hand to seal this seam. We'll do the same thing from this side. If you need to start from one side, work your way down, you can also do that. Again, seal that seam. We're going to do this one more time. So now we're going to roll this out a little bit. You can add a little bit more flour to your hands if you need to. We're going to start in the middle, kind of add a little bit of pressure towards the middle of the dough and work that out. And as you get towards the ends, you can taper these, kind of make them a little bit pointed if that's kind of what you're going for. Something like that. Now as I get done with each of these, I'm going to transfer them over to a piece of parchment paper. So again, you're going to start doing letter folds from both sides. So farthest side from me, closest side to me. Seal the seam. You can even pinch this if you need to. And then the rest of the letter folds are only going to be from this farthest side. So we'll do 2 more. I'm going to do 1 more fold and then another fold. And then one last time. Start in the middle, add a little bit of pressure, just kind of roll these out. Make the ends as tapered as you'd like them to. dough is proofing, I just want to talk about how I'm proofing these a little bit differently than how the book says to do it. The book says to proof these on a floured kitchen towel with creases in between each baguette. I'm not going to be doing that method today because I don't have a pizza peel to transfer the baguettes into the hot oven. I have found from doing this recipe a few times that letting them proof directly on the parchment paper and transferring these over to a preheated baking sheet has worked just as well. So I'll be doing it like that today. While our dough is proofing, I am going to go ahead and preheat my oven. We're going to cook these very similarly to the focaccia that we made a few months ago. We're going to start off by putting a roasting pan inside of the oven that has about 1 inch of water in it, and we're going to let that preheat with the oven. I'll also preheat a baking sheet on the top rack. When our dough is done proofing, we'll just easily slide that parchment paper with the baguettes on it onto the hot baking sheet and let these bake. Our dough is done proofing and our oven is done preheating, so we're gonna go ahead and score our baguettes. So I'm just gonna hold my lame at a 30-degree angle from my dough and just slice these about 3 or 4 times. I took my baking sheet out of the oven. I'm gonna go ahead and just slide this parchment paper really gently over to the baking sheet. We're gonna pop this in the oven and bake this with the roasting pan inside for about 10 minutes, and then we'll remove the roasting pan and bake these for an additional 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll come back and check them then. Alright, our baguettes have been cooling on a wire rack for about 30 minutes. I'm so excited to try these. It smells so good in here, so let's go ahead and do a taste test. So the baguettes turned out so good. As crazy as it sounds, I really think that 3 extra hours of fermentation time that we did this week really improved the flavor. I'm also trying to decide which baguette is my favorite. They're all shaped a little bit differently, but I think overall, I like the skinniest one the best. I think my husband is saying that this one is his favorite, but I think it's this one. Oh, the other one? You want me to redo it? I lied. My husband says this one's his favorite. Either way, they all turned out super good, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Really quickly, my dog is really freaking out because the bread is done. We're gonna give her a taste test because she's losing it. Come on. This is Dutch. She loves bread. Ow! Got my hands full with that one. Now be sure to tune in next week because we are making bread with Baguettes, which is a different kind of pre-ferment, very similar to Poolish. I'm super excited to try that recipe with you guys because it's been a while since I've tried it. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, be sure to subscribe, and thanks again for watching Doughing It with Paigey. I'll see you guys next time.